So really, there's a few things if you get nothing else out of today's presentation, there's a few key things I want you to understand, and this is the biggest one. So right now, when you talk about marijuana with your friends or just even in your communities, there is a false dichotomy. That's what our founder and president, Dr. Kevin Sabet, calls it, the false dichotomy. And basically, it's either you support legalization of marijuana wholesale, and there's shops, there's edibles and all those things, or you think that everyone should go to prison. And there's no in between. It's just this false dichotomy. It's either you're in or you're out. You're either in prison or you're not. And we reject that false dichotomy. The fact of the matter is, marijuana policy is very complicated. There are many different viewpoints people have on this. There are I think close to thousands of components of this marijuana plant. And each of those components does something a little different. THC is the ingredient that gets you high. That's one conversation. Then you have CBD, which does not get you high, may have medical benefit. The FDA has approved Epidiolex. So we have to look at this conversation as not a yes or no conversation, and we have to look at this conversation as not a either you legalize everything and let the Wild West happen, or you continue to throw people in prison. It's not an either or scenario. In reality, it's a decriminalization. So, do we think that folks should go to prison, for smoking a joint? Now, at SAM, we don't really, we're not interested in throwing people in prison for that. What you do in the confines of your own home, should be your business. And on top of that, should we, is throwing people in prison the best way to get people to stop using drugs? We're not so sure about that. So that's one question, and again, does this mean that, therefore we have to legalize everything? No. So let's keep diving into this. So that's one conversation. Two is, do we think that there's medical benefits to the marijuana plant? Now at SAM, we have a leading advisory board of scientific advisors from the leading institutions, Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, all doing the real research every day on marijuana. In fact, I was testifying in Connecticut a few months ago with one of our scientific advisory board members who was in the process of a trial using THC on patients. So our folks are doing the everyday research because we want to get the data on what's going on. So we believe strongly that there should be more medical research with the marijuana plant. But we get, leery about putting a medication up to a popular vote. So, should this go through, science and standards and rigorous clinical trials? Yes. Should it be put up to a vote and, you can sell it from a private, shop on the corner? Not so much. That doesn't sound like medicine. Now, third bucket is, do we think that it should be legal for recreational use? For people to just use, for recreation. So those are three different conversations, and they often get conflated. Often, we're talking about, for instance, in New York, we're talking about should we legalize marijuana? Well, if someone says, legalize marijuana, it's medicine for my kid, those are two different conversations. We're talking about, medicinal purposes for marijuana, which we can discuss, versus overall legalization of marijuana, which is another discussion. So second key point I really want you to take away from today is this just happened just a few days ago. December 8th, Altria, the owner of Philip Morris, Marlboro, just did a $1.8 billion investment in the marijuana industry, Cronos, this company. We've seen a couple other major investments as well. But this is really what we're talking about. The first point is let's reject this false dichotomy. The second point is, what is the industry today? The industry today is big marijuana, big tobacco 2.0. Now I'm going to dive more into that later. So here's something interesting. This data just came out last week from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. That is the foremost, most credible survey on drug use in the country. That is where it's the holy grail, National NISDA. So they just released their stuff on youth use, and basically for ages 12 and older, for legalized states, it's up 14% last year. So in other words, for states that legalize marijuana, they are seeing kids 12 and up using at a much increased rate from states that did not legalize. So that is very important that we see the impact that legalization is having, especially among our youth. So today's marijuana. Now, I am certain that when I say the word marijuana, many of you are probably thinking in your head of something like this, right? So, this is kind of the 1970s, what we see. But I'm here to tell you that I lived it firsthand in Colorado. I've seen it every time I've gone back to Colorado. I'm flying back for Christmas with my family here in just a few days. And this is what I'm going to see when I get to Colorado. So this is what marijuana is now. So when you imagine marijuana, don't think a joint anymore, because that isn't even close to what the market is. This is where the money's at. So this is what marijuana looks like today. These are the concentrates. These are the 99% potencies. This looks like a narcotics bust versus a harmless substance. So again, I think you'll hear a lot like this is a plant, this is natural, this is anything but. This is anything but. So marijuana is all about industry. What do I mean by that? There's a whole bunch of industries getting involved. Okay, so the industry today, I talked a little bit about kid-friendly. They're doing kid-friendly products. I'm going to dive a little bit more into some of those marketing schemes, but potency's up, aggressive marketing. I cannot stress enough the commercialization aspect. Now, I understand in New York, commercialized, that's just the way of life out here. This is the commercialized center of the world. But I want you to think about, billboards and radio ads and TV ads and signs and everything, all geared around this idea of using this new product. And I want you to think about lollipops and free dabs and this and that. It's just unreal the amount of sheer inundation this industry puts. They put millions and millions and millions of dollars into this advertising. And in Colorado, it's just, you can't get away from it. So, so when we legalized it in Colorado, the biggest reason for folks was they wanted to get people out of prison. We know from the false dichotomy that was a false dichotomy. There was other ways we could have solved that problem, but that's what we thought. What happened was, and a lot of people thought, we're going to get people out of prison and we're not going to have to deal with this anymore. It's going to kind of fade to the background. But this industry and the marijuana issue does not want to go to the background. They want to be at the forefront because we're a capitalist society. It is a for-profit business. They have to develop their markets and expand. If we think that we're just going to legalize this and it's going to go away, think again. You will be confronted with this. You will see this on the road. You will see this while you're driving to school. You will see this elsewhere. Well, you may actually not see it in this area because most of the towns like this ban pot. Across the country, Colorado, elsewhere, these states have all majority banned, the towns have banned it, which I'll get into in a little bit. But anyway, you have to think about that. Contaminants, so they tell us it's regulated, but just dozens and dozens and dozens of recalls. And then of course the industry fights regulations. So I talked to you guys about potency, right? It would make sense if there was a limit on potency, right? Some sort of cap like we have with alcohol or something like that. Not one state in the country that has legalized marijuana has any form of potency cap. Drug driving, major problem. So in Colorado, drug driving fatalities, marijuana impaired driving fatalities more than doubled, 156% increase since legalization. That's 156% more families who lost their loved ones on the road from a marijuana impaired driver as a result of this lax policy. Washington, same thing, more than doubled. Washington traffic study this year just did some very interesting research. They found that 1 in 5 drivers are driving under the influence of marijuana in Washington. Very concerning, that's up from 1 in 10. But what they found was for the 64.2% of respondents that openly admitted to smoking or using marijuana within 3 hours of driving, so in other words, rock solid, we know they were impaired while driving, they thought that it helped them drive better or it didn't impair them at all. So we got a long way to go on education. So does the public support marijuana legalization? All of you in this room probably think it's inevitable, maybe, or maybe some of you don't. But probably we've all seen the polls. We've all seen 60% of Americans support this. They think it should be legalized. It's never been higher, etc. But how you ask the question is key, because like I said before, we're being pitched this false dichotomy, right? Yes or no. Do you want to legalize it? Yes or no. But the fact of the matter is there's more options. So these polls all ask you yes or no binary question, but if they're given options, people actually do not support recreational marijuana legalization. So we did a national poll, and we asked people if they'd support federal enforcement of the law if it didn't involve low-level users. And a plurality did, 80% undecided. We went further into kind of the national breakdown. We asked people, what is your policy preference? Again, the plurality preferred either medical or decriminalization or keeping the current policy versus commercial production. But then what was even more interesting was when we went state by state. So in New York, there was an Emerson College poll that found 60% of New Yorkers support. This was earlier this year. 60% of New Yorkers support legalization of marijuana. Well, we went right back to Emerson. We said, run the same question again, but give options. Give them, keep current policy, keep medical, repeal decrim, legalize marijuana for commercial sale, or repeal both and prohibit it. And when we did that, it fell from 60% support to 40% support for recreational marijuana. Why? Because people want to decriminalize it, or they want some other option. But what we're finding across the country, people are more interested in making sure folks don't go to jail. They don't want somebody to go to jail for smoking a joint in their home. I think that's where most of us are at. Do we want, lollipops with 99% THC? No. Do we want pot shops in our neighborhood? No. Do we want pot ads? No. But we certainly don't want to see people going to jail. So that's what we're finding in these polls, is that the public's perception of this is very complicated. New Jersey, same thing.